Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. Would you please take the roll?
Commissioner Burke. Commissioner Dunn.
Present.
Commissioner Arp.
Here.
Commissioner Gilmetti. Commissioner Guardino. Commissioner Inman.
Here.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Here.
Commissioner Madaffer.
Here.
Commissioner Tavaloni. Chair Alvarado.
Yes,
We have a quorum.
we have a quorum. Do we have 8? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
Yes.
7, 8. We do have 8. Okay, item 2, Mr. Mahler.
Yes, Commissioners. Item 2 is a resolution of necessity appearance. The appearance was requested by Mr. Mike Leifer, who is an attorney for the property owners, and if the chair could check to see if the property owners or their representatives are here.
Are the property owners present? Nope.
Seeing none, the property owners did have their attorney send in a letter yesterday stating their concerns again. Staff would be entering that letter into the record and recommending that you approve the resolution of necessity.
Second.
Motion by Gilmetti, second by, what's down here, Madaffer. Any questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Minutes.
Motion to approve. Second.
Motion by Lucy, second by Christine. Questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Meetings for compensation.
Second.
Motion by Tavaloni, second by Arp. Questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Our executive director's report.
All right. Commissioners, wanted to use this time to update you on Senate Bill 1 implementation. Mitch has an item today that he'll be sharing more details, but wanted to let you all know that the kickoff event that the commission held on June 8th with the really the leaders in transportation sharing their perspectives, it was very successful. Can you hear me? It was attended by Commissioners Alvarado, Tavaloni, Guardino, and Madaffer. We actually had more than 200 in attendance, either in person or via webcast, and it was very well received, and the perspectives that we all heard that day will serve as a platform and a foundation that staff will use in moving forward on developing guidelines. The next day, on Friday, June 9th, was an actual kickoff of the actual guideline development process. And that meeting was actually attended by on average, more than 100 attendees at any given time. And so that, again, was a very successful workshop, and we just appreciate everyone that participated and is continuing to participate with the commission staff in writing the guidelines for SB1 programs. We also, the commission staff has also on June 23rd held a workshop for the ATP guideline development process, and actually this morning there was another workshop on the congested corridors program that was held. So the staff has been working very hard, and I just want to use this time to recognize our staff. It's a wonderful team, and I just can't tell you how grateful I am as your executive director to have this team. So, well. All right, and then also wanted to update you on a few meetings that Commission Deputy Director Eric Thronson and myself have attended with the environmental justice community. We have met with advocates in both Northern and Southern California, and we've heard from these environmental justice stakeholders concerns that are important that we consider as we move forward. And Commission staff is working on a set of recommendations to bring forward to the Commission at a future time. And we also, for those of you, a majority of the commissioners attended We had 9 commissioners that attended a legislative roundtable on May 23rd, and we did have 21 members of the legislature and their staff attend, and so it was a wonderful event. And we are, as staff, working on convening a legislative staff meeting with commission staff in August to discuss legislative topics and transportation policy. We are also planning a forum on August 3rd in Sacramento to really hear from experts in the technology world on future planning and future implications that we should all be considering in the transportation program, and for staff to utilize and the commission to utilize in developing policy recommendations for the legislature. And again, we are inviting legislative staff to attend that event, as well as any member that's interested of the public. And then some staffing updates. I don't see her. I wanted to introduce you. There she is. Erica, would you please stand? Erica Butler began working for the commission back in November, and I don't think that we've ever formally introduced her to the commission and all of you in the audience. And she is really a key player in our office. She helps me tremendously, and I'm just grateful that she's here. She comes with 10 years of military service, 7 years in the banking industry, and a combined total of 20 years providing support to top-level executives. She's had a long career path, and she's just a true asset to this team. So I wanted to introduce her to you. And then Reza Alfami, can you stand up? Reza is a Caltrans employee who has been on loan with the commission for, I guess, maybe 6 months now. And he is a registered civil engineer, 18 years experience at Caltrans. He's worked at the Water Quality Control Board in the past. He's been very instrumental in working on Caltrans shop projects. He has been lending great assistance to Stephen and Rick in carrying out shop-related responsibilities, the oversight and accountability of the shop program. And we're thankful to Caltrans for loaning him to us. And I'm thankful for him, and I know our team is, that he's been here. And Reza's been a great asset. So thank you, Reza.
Thank you.
And I have 2 other. The next staff recognition would be David Van Dyken. David has served in our office as a limited term staff, as a associate deputy director for the last, I think it's been 2 years now. Just only 1?
1 year.
Okay, well,
It
David,
just seems like 2, huh?
the reason, well, let me tell you why. David, in a short period of time then, has truly assisted the commission in carrying out its responsibilities, not only in assisting Eric on legislation, legislative bill analyses, legislative presentations. He's also assisted in the development of the 2016 annual report. He's assisted Lori in the active transportation program. He was instrumental in developing the California Mobility Investment Opportunities Report, and most recently, he's taken on the Congested Corridors program. All this knowing that he's on a limited term assignment for the commission. And so for that, we're truly grateful, David. Thank you.
Thank you.
And last but not least, today marks kind of a change for the commission. We have had a individual who's attended our commission meetings, I think possibly for the last 39 years. And this is David Maxwell. Many of you know him. He brings us cookies. He attends our meetings. He catches things. He brings to our attention, and he's always there to support staff and the commission. And David has let us know that he's not going to make our meetings here in the near future. Maybe he mentioned to me when he retires, he may be back. But right now, his job is taking him away from our meetings. So for that, we're disappointed. But David, if you could come up here, we have a resolution for you. And we just want to thank you for everything you've done for the commission and supporting the commission over the last 39 years.
Congratulations. Susan, oh yeah, cookies. I know the cookies.
1, 2, 3. Good.
Do you have
Thank
a
you.
succession plan? Is there a new baker coming along?
I'm afraid not.
You got the mic, give him the mic.
No, I'm a public speaker.
Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome, thank you.
It was tie, highly themed tie. So I have transportation
Okay.
tie.
I know. Commissioners, that concludes my report. Thank you.
Commissioners' reports.
I can find my mic. It's my button.
Up on top. Should be up above. There you go.
I'm on. Sorry, I was pushing the green light. I just wanted to report that I yesterday moderated a panel with the West Coast Corridor Coalition, which is a joint project with Federal Highways and Caltrans on the freight topics of truck parking and some of the new efficiency work that's being done at the Port of Los Angeles. So a report will be issued shortly. They have a series, I believe, of 4 different webinars across the United States that they've been putting together. So if you all missed it, I know you all were listening in, but if you did miss it, we'll get you the report. Thank you.
Any further reports? Thank you. Brian?
Good morning, Commissioners and staff. I wanted to start out really complimenting the work you have been doing on SB1 implementation. You've jumped out of the gate going fast, but also deliberate with plenty of time for people to provide comment at workshops and multiple opportunities. And I think you're going beyond what has been done in the past. I often find out information from your tweets. So compliment the CTC on finding new ways to provide information to the public and let people know what the schedule is and what opportunities are to attend your meetings. Thank you for also liking the Causta tweets. That's right. I wanted to provide a few updates on some implementation efforts related to SB1 that the Transportation Agency has been involved in. We did have our first workshops on Monday and Tuesday for some of the programs we are charged with doing guidelines for, some of the new transit programs, some additional money for transit agencies for fix-it-first type of repair on transit vehicles, or state of good, what are we calling it? State of good repair, fix it first. Also, our transit and intercity rail capital program, which we work with the CTC on and bring allocations forward to you. Looking at the SB1 funds and the ongoing cap and trade revenues, we're telling our stakeholders we're hopeful the upcoming round for that program, that is a 5-year round, will likely be in the range of $1.5 billion to $2 billion for transformative transportation transit projects. So we're excited about that. We also were happy that our various trailer bills are moving forward well now. The governor did sign the main budget bill yesterday. There are two transportation budget trailer bills. One of them was AB 115 that included some follow-up on the SB1 side. It included also some streamlining of projects, and a lot of this was associated with Riverside County, but the benefits really were statewide as it evolved. And this is something that Commissioner Tavallone worked on as well. Bill related to SB1, SB 132 directed a Riverside County Transportation Task Force to look at some projects that were funded through this package and see how we could streamline those. But the task force took a broader view and were supportive when we came forward with expanded authority for things like construction manager, general contractor, procurement authority. So the current statewide cap on that is 12 projects, but with that legislation, it's now 24 in the pilot. So an additional 12 that can be available statewide, and there were a couple specifically reserved for Riverside as well. So I wanted to, again, thank Commissioner Tavallone for his work on that, and again, we're happy that both there were two bills technically that covered that topic, and both have now passed out of the legislature. The laggard here on our transportation trailer bills has to do with the remaining topics of statutory language for the freight program in SB1, also the advanced mitigation program in SB1, and finally some language that's directive of Caltrans for how they can do more outreach to the contracting community as the work is going to grow, of course, due to SB1, and that's both existing contractors but also new entrants that might decide to come into the area of construction contracts for transportation due to the SB1 revenues. So that legislation will either be AB 118 or SB 103. But both of those vehicles passed through the full budget committees of each house this week, the Assembly Budget Committee on Monday and the Senate Budget Committee yesterday. So those look to be on a very good track. I understand at least one house will likely vote on those bills on the floor tomorrow, and that would really complete our initial SB1 implementation package of legislation and budget. So with that, I'll close and happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Seeing none. Comey?
Thank you, Chair Alvarado. Good afternoon, everybody. Glad to be here on behalf of Malcolm. Speaking of SB1 and the work that staff has been doing, I'd like to start by thanking CTC staff on working with the department in the development of guidelines for the interim shop guidelines as well as the asset management guidelines. I think there was a lot of work that went into that in a very short period of time so that we can be up and running on both of those counts. It wasn't easy to incorporate the Senate bill requirements, the SB1 requirements and processes into established processes that have been around for so long. But I think we've managed to make it work. So I want to just acknowledge the effort that went into that on behalf of the department as well as CTC staff. We are obviously encouraged by the momentum that I think Commission has started off with the kickoff, but internally we also have a driving force on trying to make sure we get SB1 projects out. And one element of that may be outward reflecting is the opportunities we're going to start getting into in terms of expanding capacity, both on the A&E side as well as on the construction side in terms of both workforce, equipment, and materials. So that's something that we see as a potential issue down the line. So we're working on some strategies on industry capacity expansion. Secondly, we released the bike ped plan last month. The department adopted its first ever California state bicycle pedestrian plan. It was a 2-year effort, and it achieved, in many respects, a lot of outreach in terms of getting to advocacy groups, public officials, and subject matter experts, as well as citizens across the state. The end result is a plan that will be a blueprint for our path forward towards safely integrating bicycles and pedestrians into the fabric of California's transportation. And I think it fits perfectly also well in the language that SB1 provided, as well as the funding capacity that SB1 set out for us. I also wanted to note, since Malcolm is not here, that he and I had an opportunity to hold a town hall meeting with department staff at the Kearney Mesa maintenance station in San Diego. He's done many of these town halls, and I'm sort of the sidekick on those. And we've been able to reach out to the department, and these are opportunities for more interactive conversations with staff, especially with the passage of SB1. It was also an opportunity to talk about how that becomes part of our new set of activities and making sure that we're geared up to work on that. Plus, because we were talking to maintenance staff, there was a strong emphasis on safety in that conversation. In June this month, we released the fourth quarter mile marker report, mile marker magazine. This edition focused on an overview of SB1 and the efforts we have in accelerating work both on the pavement side and fixing damage caused by the past winter storms. This is a vital communication piece for us in terms of outlining performance as far as the department is concerned. And then lastly, I want to close with two appointments that Malcolm made in the month of June. We appointed Bob Myers to the position of Division Chief for Division of Equipment. Bob is a well-rounded Caltrans employee in the equipment area. He began with us as a heavy equipment mechanic and has worked his way up to become the Division Chief for the Division of Equipment. Also this month, Malcolm appointed Phil Stolarski as the Division Chief for Environmental Analysis. For the past 16 months, Phil's been working in the division, and most recently we had a retirement, and Phil has stepped up to take that position. He had worked several years in the department. I'm not going to tell you how long, but he was also at one time the Deputy Division Chief of Material Engineering and Testing in the Trans Lab. So Phil's really well regarded, and we welcome both of them to those positions. And with that, I'll conclude my remarks and see if there are any questions.
Questions? Thank you. Federal Highway, Mr. Schneider.
May I just,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't have a question. I'd like to make a comment. I made it last month, but I'd like to say it again. I think it's so important for Caltrans on every project to start putting up signs, your gas tax money at work. Because already we're seeing what is happening yesterday as far as there are going to be more elections for recalls. And we need to try to make it very clear to the public that their dollars are being used for these projects. So I hope that Caltrans will start getting up some signs or notices when people see something new coming up. It's your gas tax dollars at work.
We are working on that very clearly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Schneider.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'm glad to be here today on behalf of Vince Bamano. He and Malcolm, I believe, are in Alaska working, so don't ask any more questions on that. All right, so I'm going to start off with some good news. FHWA recently announced our annual Transportation Planning Excellence Awards for 2017. There were 11 of them. We had some award winners in California. SCAG won an award for their Go Human advertising campaign to reduce collisions in Southern California. MTC won an award for their regional plan, Plan Bay Area, which was the first to incorporate the state-mandated sustainable regional strategy. And Sandag actually got the top award, we call it the best of the best, for their San Diego Forward, the regional plan, which was a great blueprint for how Sandag will invest in the region by providing more choices, strengthening and supporting thriving communities, and it also included a sustainable community strategy. So California, we won 3 out of 11 awards nationally, so that's something to be very proud of, so I'm happy to announce that. All right, going on to the 2017 DOT Appropriations Act. There's some details. I know Vince presented on it somewhat last time, and would expand a little bit on what he said. The reason why I know he spoke about it is that he told me, I asked him if there was anything he wanted me to speak about today, and he said, look at the video and do something like that. So I'm going to expand on what he said. The FAST Act level for 2017, $43.3 billion nationally. So it was good to see that that FAST Act level was enacted by Congress. We got $3.77 billion for California in 2017. The DOT Appropriations Act did provide $500 million for Tiger grants. At this point in time, FHWA still has not released the notice of funding availability or opportunity. So the application, the time to submit application has not arrived. You guys probably realize normally that happens around the February, March timeframe, and the Tiger grants are announced in September, October. It's highly unlikely, since we haven't issued the notice of funding opportunity in late June, that we will meet that time frame. But we do expect that notice be made sometime in the near future. I know there's been a lot of talk at the commission meeting about the emergency relief program previously. The DOT appropriations bill did provide another $528 million nationally in ER program funds. Those funds have not yet been distributed. We cross our fingers. Traditionally, California gets about 10% of that. We can't guarantee that, but we expect that California will get somewhere around $50 million when that money is released, and that should happen fairly soon. That is in addition to that $10 million early release or quick release that we got in March, and the $92.5 million of the standard distribution that we received on April 6th. The other thing that the continued was the repurposing of the earmarks. I know that's been happening. So when the DOT Appropriations Act was signed, it picked up another year of earmarks that can be repurposed. As Vince said last time, the projects can now be within 100 miles of the original earmark. We should have that list today or tomorrow that we will provide Caltrans and then begin working with you on that. The repurposed earmark funds must be obligated on or before September 30th, 2020, so we've got a little bit of time to do that repurposing. Moving along, the FY 2018 President's proposed budget continues the FAST Act level, so we are very hopeful that Congress will enact that FAST Act level, which would be $45 billion. That would mean about another $100 million for Caltrans, so we'd move from $3.8 billion to $3.9 billion, somewhere around there, in federal funds for Caltrans in FY 18. The President's budget, I'm sure you've heard this, it also included the $200 billion federal investment for improving the nation's infrastructure, and that's all infrastructure across the board. There's not enough details in that description yet to know whether that includes highway infrastructure at this point in time. So fast lane grants. So the notice of funding opportunity for Fast Lane 2 was November through December of last year. FHWA still has, or the OST, the Office of the Secretary, still has not announced those awards. We're hopeful again that will happen very, very soon. This is about the time frame that we expect that to happen. That's a pretty good amount of money. There was $850 million that were on the line, that the different organizations were competing for. And just this morning, hot off the press, there was an announcement of a new grant program. It's actually replacing and improving the Fast Lane grant program. It's called the Infrastructure for Rebuilding America Discretionary Grant Program, INFRA. And it's going to be a 2-year program, or the applications that will be submitted is for 2 years of funding level, so it's actually $1.5 billion worth of discretionary grant funds available. The notice of funding availability was published at 10 a.m. Eastern Time this morning, I believe. Improves on the Fast Lane grant program, updated criteria used to evaluate projects that align national and regional economic vitality and leverage more non-federal funding. So the application timeframe will be from August 1st through about end of November 27th or 28th. So that's a large sum of money that will be made available starting August 1st, or the applications will be received starting August 1st. And finally, transportation performance management, all the performance measures, regulations have finally been published. The safety performance measures effective date was last year, April 14th, 2016. The state has to have their targets set by August 31st of this year. The MPOs then have to have their targets set 180 days after that. The pavement and bridge condition measures, that regulation was published May 20th, 2017, just a little while ago. And the state must set their targets May 20th, 2018. And the freight, traffic congestion, and mobile source emissions, final rule was published, was finalized or made effective the same day, May 20th, 2017. And the state must set, again, their target date or targets for by May 20th, 2018, and the MPOs must set their targets 180 days after that. Any questions?
One.
So on the Fast Lane 2.0, the applications we have in,
Right.
is there going to be a rural set aside? Some of the rurals are going to be awarded?
I don't have those details. We can provide them to you.
Okay, well, that's what the chatter has been, so if you can confirm that. And then we have a number of fantastic applications that went in my opinion. I'm just a little biased here. But an awful lot of time and effort by our team members went into really preparing. So hopefully some of that is still useful and we don't have to entirely start over, but is there any recognition at all, or is the NOFA going to say, rewrite everything?
I saw the NOFA about an hour before I came over here. Comey, do you have additional information?
Yeah, I think from what I saw on the NOFA, it sounds like we're starting over, is my sense, because the emphasis changed slightly away from freight, which was fast lane, to more leverage and bringing other resources to the table to do compelling projects.
Well, freight has a lot of P3s. We don't call them P3s, but it's a sector that's dominated by public-private partnerships. So anything we can do, I hate for our teams to spend a gazillion hours submitting a proposal and then we say, just kidding, and, we're going to write something else. We need to get projects out the door and delivered. So whatever we can do to make sure that we honor whoever's setting the rules, but not have all of our time and resources go into writing proposals. So whatever we can do, but we desperately need to get some of those project dollars rolling. So thank you.
All right. Well, like I said, the Fast Lane 2 award should be soon, and then the applications for the infra grants is from August 1st through the end of November. So I guess if the Fast Lane, some of those projects don't get awarded in Fast Lane 2, you just have to review the criteria in the NOFO and measure what was previously prepared and see if they still are projects that meet the criteria, and then what additional information you'd have to include in a resubmission or a submission of the application.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our regional agencies, Kenneth.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Kenneth Cow with MTC, representing the regional agencies. Yesterday, the RTPAs met in conjunction with the CalCog directors for the first time ever. The first half was dedicated to Senate Bill 1 discussions. Specifically, the group supported a few guiding principles in the development of the guidelines. Among them, number one, supporting a longer programming cycle of perhaps 3 to 4 years. Number two, fully supporting pre-construction costs, especially to build a shelf of projects, recognizing that SB1, fingers crossed, as an ongoing program. Number 3, encourage flexibility in the first cycle to ensure quick delivery of projects, recognizing that we will have the opportunity to amend the guidelines in the future. Number 4, always consider geographic equity. And number 5, supporting, putting the O back in shop, the operations piece, as well as encouraging complete streets in the shop. Those are just a few of the principles, and I think the RTPAs and CalCog will be working together to coordinate a letter to send to the Commission for your consideration. The regional agencies also wish to thank Lori and Mitch of your staff in accepting the various changes to the ATP augmentation guidelines, which is on your agenda this month. I think overall we're pretty satisfied, and we're really looking forward to putting those ATP dollars to work as soon as possible, since those are the first monies to come out from SB1. Similarly, we received an update on the 2018 STIP from Caltrans and CTC staff. You'll be reviewing the draft guidelines and the fund estimate, and I think everyone is very pleasantly surprised that we have money to program this cycle, especially given the last 2016 painful cuts. So really looking forward to programming those funds and delivering them as soon as possible. Finally, in comings and goings, I did want to recognize, well, first the comings. I guess I'm going. But first the coming in. Well, this is my last meeting as RTPA moderator, but I did want to recognize our two new folks that are taking over from the regional agencies. Patricia Chen from Los Angeles Metro in the back there. She'll be taking over as moderator starting next month. So she gets to write all the letters now from here on out. And also Luke McNeil-Caird from Placer County will be taking over as my vice moderator. And also on the goings, I did also want to recognize two Davids. David Maxwell, of course, which you recognized earlier. I think David has always been, he's come to our regional agency meetings a number of times and has shared his wonderful cookies, and we'll definitely miss those. Thank you. And also another David Yale from Los Angeles Metro. He is retiring after many, many years of service. He used to be regional agencies moderator back in the 90s. And he's most recently done a number of work implementing and developing the measure programs down in Los Angeles, so wanted to recognize them. And that would conclude my report. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. It's been a great year.
Thank you.
Maura, rural counties.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Mara Toomey, Chair of the Rural Counties Task Force. The rural counties met on May 12th and discussed the following issues and concerns. In regards to the 2017 ATP augmentation, the rural counties appreciate the Commission staff's thoughtful consideration of their concerns and support the staff's recommendation to adopt the ATP augmentation guidelines at this meeting. In regards to the other SB1 programs, the rural counties appreciate the opportunity to participate in the development of the guidelines and appreciate the Commission staff's willingness to consider flexibility, equity, and geographic balance in the guidelines, most importantly, balancing the needs of urban and rural regions. And we too also congratulate David on his retirement, but hope to see him at the rural counties occasionally. And that concludes my report. We'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Maura. Self-help counties. Keith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, and staff. CTC, Keith Dunn on behalf of the Self-Help Counties Coalition. I would like to congratulate Secretary Annis on the budget sub-trailer language and the inclusion of alternative delivery mechanisms. I always like to take the opportunity upon successfully congratulating folks on pilot programs to remind them that we don't need to do pilot programs that, as I've been saying since he was in the Senate, we should really authorize transportation agencies to use the best tools possible to deliver their projects and make those decisions regionally. So while I'd like to congratulate us on another pilot program, I would also like to say that I think we have a lot of pilot programs, and maybe it's about time that we authorize agencies to make those decisions on their own. Preaching to the choir, I know, but you got to take the opportunities when they present themselves. With that said, I would also like to report back from Washington, D.C. that the other day we had a markup on the FAA reauthorization. Sadly, Chairman Schuster did not take the amendment offered by Congressman Lowenthal, which was another effort to address the specific sales tax on aviation fuel. That amendment was one of two amendments that was mentioned for additional follow-up, so I think we have some sympathies from the chairman. He did not want to take the amendment for whatever reasons that the chairman had, but it's an issue that the self-help counties will be following up on in direct conversations with the advocates that represent our various agencies in DC and the association as a whole. The state of California also, I know, is working in a little coalition with us, trying to figure out how to best address that issue. It's several $100 million from our budgets annually, and the state, I think, is a little less than that. But we're working that issue. We will continue to work on that issue. And Chairman Schuster did mention that he would like to follow up with the groups and try and find a solution. So I don't know where it goes from here, but it's obviously one that we feel very seriously about, as it does redirect voter-approved sales tax, a small percentage of a sales tax, but we take that very seriously in our commitment to the voters and what we've told them we're going to do with that money. So we will continue to work on that issue. We're pleased to work with the commission staff to come to an understanding on the SLP program as directed by the chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to report that we have worked that out and we'll be proceeding. We're happy to participate in the implementation program as well. It's a lot of good things coming down in the future for both organizations, and we're looking forward to that. Had a successful town hall meeting, which hopefully members of the audience were able to participate, watch, but we're very thankful to have every commissioner participate. We're looking forward to working with your staff to have a forum at the next Focus on the Future conference. It'll be the 31st of October in San Francisco. We'll get you out in time to trick or treat, I promise. But we're looking to do another forum like that where we have commissioners and the executives from the self-help county kind of talk about the issue and where we're going. We thought that there's a great level of participation at the last commission meeting, and I think that we have some issues to follow up on and some direction that we'll be working with Ms. Branson to try and line up a program that will be good for the conference, but also productive from a workload basis. So with that, our next meeting is August 2nd in San Diego. And I'll take any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we're going to start jumping into policy matters. We've got quite a full agenda, so we're going to move through it hopefully fairly quickly. Item 13, Eric.
Commissioner, why do you always say that right before I present an item? I don't know. I feel like I do a pretty good job of keeping it brief, but I will do my best. Commissioners, I'm sorry, what?
Hint, hint.
Fair enough. This is an action item. However, commission staff is not recommending any action, so unless you give us a specific direction, you won't have to do anything for this book item. It is more just an update on a variety of issues, some of which has already been given to you as an update by, for example, Secretary Annis. So I was going to update you on the budget. The 2017-18 Budget Act was signed by the governor yesterday, as was trailer bills, and there's another trailer bill that may be sent to the governor tomorrow. But again, Undersecretary Annis covered those. The next part of the update that I was going to give you, or I am going to give you, is on the bills that the commission has taken a support position on. The commission has taken a support position on 10 measures this year, 3 of which have become law, 3 of which are no longer moving, and 4 are still in the legislative process. Those 4 are listed on page 3 of the book item. They have all actually passed the policy committees as of yesterday in their second house and are all now in the Senate Appropriations Committee, moving along just fine. 2 of which are Assemblymember Frazier's bills, and we are there to be in support of those bills every opportunity we get. Finally, there is an update on the federal Trump administration's budget. There are some dire proposals in there for the future of transportation programs that you might want to read about. I think it is hard to imagine Congress adopting the proposed cuts, but stranger things do seem to happen. So if you have any questions about those or anything, please let me know. Otherwise, I will pass the mic on to the next staffer. Great, thank you.
Commissioners, tab 14 is an update on the implementation of the Road Repair and Accountability Act of 2017, SB 1. This item is labeled an informational item. However, we noticed it as an action item, and as with the last item, no specific action is required. It's already been mentioned in a number of the workshops that were held, so I won't go into those again. I would also note that staff has given presentations at forums such as CalCog and the RTPA meeting about SB1 and the programs we're doing, and those forums have generated some useful feedback, and we will be utilizing that input in the development of our guidelines. Page 2 of the book item contains a schedule of our planned workshops. There's an updated schedule in your handout. Attachment A to the book item is an overview of the Commission's implementation plan. There is a pink replacement item that was emailed out yesterday, last week, and is in your packet. I just want to point out a couple of changes, changes compared to what was done in May. As was mentioned by Keith Dunn, at the chair's direction, we met with the self-help counties to reach a compromise on the percent of formulaic versus competitive program or split for the local partnership program, as this was the subject of a little bit of discussion at the last commission meeting. The outcome of this meeting was an agreement to recommend a 50% competitive program and to revisit this percentage in the next programming cycle. Regarding the local streets and roads program, we are working towards an earlier adoption of the program guidelines that was presented in May. The plan presented in May proposed an October adoption of guidelines. We're now aiming for August. The plan that you have in pink indicates that the list of cities and counties would be presented to the Commission in October. Based on some of our initial conversations with local jurisdictions, because a number of the counties approve their budgets later in the year, this may be a challenge, and so we may need to revisit that October date, but we'll continue working on this. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Mr. Medaffer. Up high.
Up there, sorry. Thank you very much, and outstanding job to the staff for all of the work that's been going into this. And I just wanted to add on to something that Commissioner Burke said earlier, and perhaps Secretary Annis could comment on it, but clearly as SB1 rolls out, I think one of the things that's most important, certainly what I've picked up in the public ether, has been the concerns over transparency, accountability, making sure that these dollars are actually going to go to work to what the legislature has promised, efficiencies to make sure Caltrans is being as efficient as possible. So I believe at some point the chair might be talking about some sort of an oversight role that I've suggested that the Commission take beyond just what is called for in the legislation. But I also want to ask regarding the marketing. You mentioned that that's in the, when I talk about marketing signage, I mean, I don't care if it's a pothole being filled on a city street. There ought to be a stanchion or something there that says, paid for in part thanks to SB 1. You know, certainly major projects, we already know about that through the regional agencies, but if it's rural, urban, city, county, you want to comment on that, Secretary Annis?
Sure. Well, most programs of this size and scale, such as the Federal American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, did include those type of things you're talking about, and Commissioner Burke talked about as well. So we think they're very appropriate here. We have been doing some work on the logo, what the signage would look like. We think those type of things will hopefully be out in the coming weeks. And those things we hope the CTC will adopt, as well as you know, putting the SB1 logo on your documents, your workshop material, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of ways to get the word out, get the branding known, and let the public understand the benefits that will be coming with the SB1 funds.
Thank you.
Anything else? Very good. Item 15, Lori.
Commissioners, this is an action item. It's to adopt the Road Maintenance and Rehabilitation Account Addendum to the 2017 Active Transportation Program Fund Estimate. I want to point out 2 items on this fund estimate that haven't appeared on previous ATP fund estimates. One is that the 2017 Budget Act appropriates no less than $4 million per year to the California Conservation Corps for active transportation projects, so you'll see that on the fund estimate. And also, the Lake Tahoe MPO is now designated a large MPO and will participate in the MPO component of the ATP, so you'll see them listed as one of the MPOs in that program. Stephen Keck is here if you have any questions on the numbers. If that, I would recommend adoption of the fund estimate. Yes.
Motion by Gilmetti, second by Dunn. Further questions? All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 16, excuse me, item 16 is a timed item, so we'll move to item 18. David.
All right. Hello, Commissioners. So tab 18 is the budget and allocation capacity update, and it is an informational item. Stephen Keck from the Caltrans Division of Budgets will present on this item. His presentation will cover allocations in fiscal year 16-17, the project savings report, and anticipated budget and allocation capacity for fiscal year 17-18. His presentation will also cover the state budget, trailer bills, and how they affect next year's budget. Mr. Keck.
I may not do all of that. So it's great to be back. This is my first time back as budget chief since I left in December. So I heard some things that happened while I was gone, and I'm very excited to talk about some of them today. But I'll start with the run-of-the-mill stuff, which is budget and allocation capacity. There's been a lot of discussion already about the budget itself. The only thing I'll add is this budget is one of a string of budgets that have been passed on time. We haven't had a late budget since 2010. That's primarily due to Proposition 25, which lowered the threshold for passing a budget to 50%. It's been a tremendous boon to us. Some of you have been around a long time, remember the days when we had difficulty making cash flows when there was no budget because our revenue did not come in. So it's been a tremendous boon since 2010. So in terms of allocation capacity, this year's allocation capacity was $3.4 billion as of the May meeting. The commission had allocated about 68% of that, leaving just under a third to go. There's quite a few votes on your agenda today, and I'll point out that the bulk of the remaining capacity is in the shop, and later on you'll be entertaining a book item that shows that several shop projects will be allocated in August that will be delivered in this year but allocated at the next meeting because of timing issues. I believe that book item identifies something on the order of $650 million of shop projects to be allocated at the next meeting, which is significantly greater than the remaining shop capacity that we have today. The next best thing to talk about is next year's allocation capacity. So this is the draft allocation capacity. It does not include any rollover capacity that we might have left over from this year. The total capacity of all programs and funds is $3.3 billion, but I'll note it does not include capacity for California Freight Investment Program or the congested corridors, and I'll get to those in just a minute. The shop is about $2.1 billion, STIP at $280. Other large programs are ATP at $230 million, $475 for the TIRCP, and we continue to see bond savings. These are savings from projects that we're able to reutilize, and in the next year we're looking at about $180 million in Prop 1A and Prop 1B bonds that we can reallocate to new projects. The two programs that aren't included in that capacity are the Congested Corridors Program SB1 included $250 million for that program, but the program guidelines are still under development. There's no program of projects, so we didn't want to release the capacity at this time, but we will certainly do so before it's needed. And then there's the California Freight Investment Program, similar situation here. The SB1 provided $300 million to the Trade Corridor Enhancement Account for this program. $50 million of that is available for the Air Resources Board. The rest will come to this program along with federal funds provided through the FAST Act. And again, we'll provide that allocation capacity later on when it's appropriate. The only other thing I wanted to talk about today, my special news, I'd like to bring something different to every commission meeting if I can. This time I'm going to talk about G12s. So the G12 is a resolution by the commission granting the department authority to make minor changes in project allocations. And each year, it kind of can add up to a lot of money, so I wanted to start bringing it to your attention. It is in our quarterly report, in our quarterly finance report. We have a detail about it, and we provide information on every single delegated action to commission staff. But I'm going to start bringing it quarterly to the commission in my presentations because it points out something rather interesting. So right now, through May, we've had almost 315 G12 actions, delegated actions to the department on SHOP projects that have netted a savings of $117 million. So these are savings from allocations that you made that we are reducing to save money that can go back into the program. So when we're talking about allocation capacity and where we are and what we've used, this $117 million gets recycled back into that allocation capacity to be allocated to new projects in the same fiscal year. This is a good news thing. On the STIP side, it's relatively even. There's not a lot of STIP projects that exercise this authority. It netted an increase of about $1 million. So starting in next year, when I give my presentations, I'll be talking about this on a quarterly basis, just briefly updating the commission on where we stand in terms of project savings. I write these presentations and they're due last Friday. So at that time, we didn't have a budget pass. So it says I'm expecting the budget to pass in June, and of course, or to be signed in June, and of course it was. We've already heard about trailer bills, so I won't get on talking more about that. The fund estimate is the very next item, or at least numerically the next item. So I'll talk more about that, but there's a fund estimate workshop in July, on July 17th. And then the fund estimate, which will be adopted in August, and we will present the final allocation capacity for the 17-18 fiscal year in August as well, and that will include any rollovers from the current year depending on actions taken today. So with that, I'll be happy to take any questions. And the really good stuff comes in the next book item, just by the way. Thank you. So,
Before Stephen begins.
Oh, please.
If I may.
Please do.
Thank you. Stephen will be presenting this item for Caltrans. And I just want to note you have a pink handout with your handouts that has the key tables from the fund estimate. Caltrans is required by statute to present the fund estimate to the commission by July 15th. So first of all, I wanted to thank Stephen and his staff for delivering the fund estimate in time for today's meeting. Commission staff has been meeting weekly with Caltrans staff to go over issues related to the fund estimate that allowed us to reach this point and get it developed in time. Stephen and I have been working on fund estimates for a decade and a half, and this is the most we have met on a fund estimate before. I'd also like to thank Teresa. This is her first time working on the STIP fund estimate, and I can tell you that working on the fund estimate is one of the most challenging parts of managing the STIP, and she's done an outstanding job. And with that, I'd like to turn over to Stephen for his presentation.
Thank you, Mitch, and thank you for the compliments. So actually, when Mitch talked about us not meeting this much, that includes when I actually worked for him on the fund estimate in 2002 and 2004. So I'm actually very excited to bring this fund estimate forward to the commission because it's really a good news story. We've talked about SB1 a lot already, but this is really going to be tremendous. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to walk through some of the changes that we've made to the assumptions since the last meeting in May. And then I'll get to the capacity at the end. So I urge everyone to not skip ahead to page 6. And I'm not speaking to anyone of you in particular, but page 6 is where the good stuff is, and so we'll build some anticipation as we get towards page 6. With regard to assumption changes that we've made, most all of them are tied to May revised estimates provided by Department of Finance. Primarily, the Department of Finance did, with the May release, revised consumption numbers for gasoline and diesel. They are up a little bit, quite a bit, over the 5-year period. They also updated the estimated revenues to be generated by SB1, also up a little bit from prior estimates. I'll get to the specifics on how much later on. They have also updated assumptions regarding future inflation, which will directly impact the tax rate and therefore revenue. And they made a few minor changes regarding weight fee transfers that have no material impact because it's a net zero to our accounts. The other assumption change that we've made is something called Advanced Project Development Element. And for many of us, it is a brand new term, although it has been in state law since 2000. The Advanced Project Development Element allows for up to 25% of the 2 years program capacity beyond the STIP period. So the 2 years beyond the STIP period, up to 25% of that capacity to be advanced for pre-construction activities for STIP projects or other projects. And what it does, it is allows really long-range design and planning for projects to be delivered with future capital funding, whether it's a future STIP or some other program. It hasn't been incorporated into a fund estimate since 2002, although it is required in law. And that is because in each of those years since 2002, the funding has been so unstable that the Commission has chosen to adopt a assumption to not include APDE, which was definitely the right thing to do. Now with SB1, things are very stable. We're very confident. We're adding it back into the fund estimate. It adds about $335 million in capacity to the STIP period. It's not tied to any particular year, but it is counted against county shares. So when we get into the STIP a little bit later, you'll see how that 335 compares to the whole fund estimate. The final thing I wanted to do before we get into numbers is to look at gasoline and diesel forecasts. Commissioner Inman, I believe you asked a question of my partner, Clark Paulson, at the last meeting about what kind of estimates we were looking at. We've gone back and looked at a lot of different estimates, future fuel consumption estimates from the Department of Finance, from the Energy Information Administration, Global Insight, and others. And I'm choosing to show this one at the moment because it's actually the most drastic of the ones we looked at, but it's showing a pretty significant decline in gasoline consumption. This is from the Energy Information Administration. That's not terribly inconsistent with the story we've been saying for a long time, which is we need to get off of this level, of this mode of taxation and onto something exciting like a road charge. But they're definitely projecting significant declines in gasoline consumption in the long term, not so much in the intervening 4 years. On diesel, the EIA is actually projecting a slight uptick in the next 2 years, but then pretty much flat over the 10-year period forecast. I'm showing this one because it's actually the least favorable of all forecasts. The one the fund estimate uses is actually the Department of Finance forecast. We chose this forecast in conjunction with Commission staff. It is I will say rosier, but it is a better forecast in terms of generating more revenue than if we followed the EIA forecast. And it's consistent with what the administration is forecasting moving forward with revenues. So in terms of how this compares, this slide has a lot of numbers on it, and I'll try to summarize. What this shows is our revenue estimates before May revise and after May revise. The short answer is 7% higher revenues over the fund estimate period with our new assumptions based on the May revise for both the STIP and the SHOP. So very significant in terms of percentage. Dollar-wise, it's in the several hundreds of millions of dollars over the fund estimate period. So it's all laid out here in glorious detail. We can talk more about it if you like, but generally speaking, this is in line with the administration's forecast and produces this. This is page 6. This is the STIP and SHOP capacity for the 5-year period of the fund estimate. The fund estimate for the SHOP estimates $22 billion in capacity over the next 5 years. Of that, about $5 billion is programmed, leaving a need for about $17 billion in new projects over the next 5 years. That's the program capacity over that 5-year period. Quite a bit of it, of course, is due to Senate Bill 1, and some of it is due to a much healthier situation that we're in now with regards to gas taxes, even on the base gas taxes. Consumption is up a bit from where we were 2 years ago. And with the new inflation inflationary changes to the tax rate going forward, we're in a pretty strong position. On the STIP side, we're looking at a total programming capacity of $3.3 billion over the 5-year period. That's about $2.2 billion in new capacity over what's programmed now. This dollar value is greater than what was in the original 2016 base fund estimate before we had the drastic cuts. It's a pretty good picture. And again, this is due entirely to the stabilization of the STIP revenues from SB1 and the increases going forward because of inflation. The only thing I'll note is that the PTA capacity is actually down a little bit from the prior fund estimates, and it's more than made up for by increases on the state highway account side. The other fund estimate that I get to present today is the aeronautics fund estimate. Numbers are not quite as exciting. These are in millions of dollars. But the aeronautics fund estimate is also generally adopted at the same time as the STIP and SHOP fund estimates. In this case, the two highlights for the aeronautics account are that we're assuming the full annual credit program, which is about $1.5 million a year. And we are continuing to assume a $4 million annual transfer from the local airport loan account over the 4-year period of the, this is a 4-year cycle, not a 5-year cycle, over the 4-year cycle of the aeronautics fund estimate. So that generates about $5.2 million in capacity per year over the 4 years for aeronautics, but it's dependent very heavily on that annual transfer from the local airport loan account, which you may remember we've not had a lot of success in getting done in the past because of other considerations raised by Department of Finance. So as we move forward towards the next 2 meetings, the next one being the July 18th workshop for the fund estimate and the hopeful adoption of the fund estimate at the August meeting, we will continue to work very closely with the Commission staff on any changes that you may request today or at the workshop on the 17th. And we will update the fund estimate for any changes that may come out of these trailer bills. The Budget Act has now been passed and we didn't see any changes there. And we will bring the final fund estimate for adoption in August. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
So we've got 17 billion that needs to be programmed. What is Caltrans's plan to be able to deliver on that?
That's a great question. Conway, would you like to field that question?
Thank you, Stephen. I don't know why we brought you back. Seriously, I think the process of ramping up is going to be more deliberate than just rushing into it. There are a lot of backlog needs that we have. We need to grow some capacity in getting projects ready, and we're working on that. I think 17 billion sounds really big because of where we've been, on a $2 billion annual program. What the story that's not told there is there are a number of very big projects that we're probably shy about bringing forward, so you might see some bigger projects that will come forward to use some of that capacity. And so really the work that we need to do right now that we're working on is getting projects ready to go into the future year. We're also using this opportunity to advance projects that we had constrained capacity in a fiscal year for. We're looking now to see which projects might be ripe for bringing forward and getting them done with this new capacity that we have. So there are a number of fronts that we're moving on, but part of that's going to be predicated on also growing our capacity to get work done. Now, when I say that, not meaning that we're going to grow the department in rapid force. I think it's going to be a very deliberate way we move forward with that.
Back to my infamous page 4 graph, Stephen. I just struggle with the diesel number being a flat line. I mean, if you look at the forecast for our trade numbers, you know, unless we lose a lot of market share, I don't know if you attribute this flat line to a CAFE standard on the heavy duty side. It just intuitively to me, you know, I guess you could do mode shift from a truck to train and you get less diesel consumption. Perhaps somebody is thinking because diesel prices are increasing, we're not going to consume more. There was one study that was done by UCI that said the trucks will be heavier because the price of the fuel is more. But I just struggle with this number being flat. So perhaps it's not all coming from the freight sector, this diesel consumption, but it intuitive. Anybody else? I don't know, Comey, are you in the freight world enough to think this flatlining looks a little strange?
It might, but I would hazard a guess that maybe something built in there is more efficiency in the engines that are coming out in the future. So while you might grow the fleet a little bit, there might be a few more efficient trucks than we have in the current fleet. So that may account for some of that.
Well, I would just suggest that maybe we need to understand the assumptions, because we need good information to do our planning with. So if we can just make sure that we all get the expert witnesses, whoever we decide those might be, to help us make sure that that's a good number. And then I had a question on the FAA reauthorization proposals. Have you looked at that in terms of the aeronautics dollars? Obviously, that hasn't been approved yet, but I'm being told if the privatization of air traffic control, that's going to make the smaller airports just cost prohibitive to afford that. So I don't know if you've read through that and looked at it, and someone in our aeronautics division perhaps to look at that.
Yeah. I will do two things. One is promise to bring more information on diesel estimates to the workshop on the 17th, and confess to not having read the FAA funding proposal yet, so we can provide more information on that later.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask sort of a 30,000-foot question. Maybe this is for Comey as well. And just so that I understand, we've got money in the system now after ramping down for so many years, sort of a restating of Jim Marp's question. We've been ramping down. We understand the need, but now we've got money in the system. We've been charged to roll this out as quickly as possible. We even have perhaps design build authority as a pilot project again. Great. We need more tools to certainly to get these projects out on the street. I'm just curious right now today, knowing money's coming in November, do we have a bench of projects that are ready to go? Would you rank it as absolutely, Lucy, we've got a whole list that are ready to be funded, a B, a C, a D, shovel-ready projects that can take advantage of this as quickly as possible? Or do we need to be suggesting other ideas to the legislature that would help make the process more efficient and effective as opposed to just the standard way that we've been doing business all along. In other words, what I'm trying to do is figure out, because of the nature of what we're trying to achieve, does it make sense to take advantage of the unique circumstances that we're in? Does that make sense? Comey, do you have any ideas on that? So first is, what's our bench look like realistically? I mean, I know we have a gigantic need, but when you start looking at the bench as stuff is ready to go in November, what does that look like? And then secondarily, how can we improve that?
I'm really glad to be here today.
Easy question for you.
We have thought through all of that, and anticipating that we're going to have resources in SB1 come in soon, because they're not here until much later in the year. We are advancing some of our workload in the maintenance program, in the HM program. So that's the first protocol. We have total control over that. We're able to, rather than wait for the entire year to spend some of the HM money, we're ready to unload about $200 million worth of HM work that would have been metered out because of resource constraints. We're ready to do that right off the bat in the next few weeks, actually. We're also, like I mentioned earlier on, we're also looking, and we have to really work within the constraints of how much money is really available. And we've sort of figured that out. We're able to bring projects in that may be planned for future years that are ready to go, or we can work on them faster to get them ready to go. We're able to bring those into the current year to get them done so that we can use up the capacity in the current year.
But that's why you've got advanced project development elements, I mean, to be able to fund earlier.
That's one tool. I was going to get to that. I think we're going to need as many tools as possible, and we're trying to use some tools that we had never used before, or we had used in the past and didn't have available because of funding constraints. I think we're going to be able to tap into that. We have capacity for delivery tools that also will allow us to get a few more projects out a little faster, rather than wait for the project delivery mill to get them ready, whether it's design build or CMGC. We're going to use all of those tools as much as we can. So we're working on all fronts to use up whatever capacity is in front of us for each fiscal year. I fear that we have to, as we do that, we have to also pay attention to our getting projects ready for programming. So our PIDs, the resources we have on that end, is also something we need to spend time making sure that we cultivate new projects for delivery in the out years. So I think in the first few years, we've tried to figure out how we could make sure that we don't let any capacity go to waste, least of which is we want to make sure that our federal resources are totally maxed out, as we've done over the last decade and a half, and be able to actually go, even with SB1, go for additional redistribution in August from the federal part too. So I think we're with you. We're thinking along those lines. We're trying to use all the tools that are available to us.
So there's in my mind, there's short-term, sorry, Mr. Chairman, there's short-term thinking and there's mid-range and long-range thinking. And for me, those of us that want to fight for this on the ground, to keep this going beyond the political ramifications of people being so angry at a gas tax increase, for you to say that in a few years, blah, blah, that will be too late. Do you see what I'm saying? So the short range thinking for me is, how do I get that PID process faster, more efficient? And why wasn't there a bench? Well, I get it, because we didn't have money. But that's what I'm trying to look for, is how to make this demonstratively better, not just for the short and the mid-range, but in the long range, taking advantage of this unique circumstance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and we feel like being successful in the short range begins to set us up for the long range as well. Yeah. Now, just to be clear, we were really set up to not create a bench in the past years.
That's why I'm asking.
With the PID resources that we had, and obviously with the capacity that we have. And so we have to do a better job of making the case for why we need additional capacity to get PIDs done. But even without that, one of the things that we're working on within the department is how do we get a little more efficient with the PID resources so that we can create a few more project capacity coming out of the current PID program.
Yeah, okay. I won't ask you on the mic how you would grade your supply right now. I'll talk to you offline. What letter grade you would give yourself. Thanks, Comey.
Okay, Commissioners, before I start, I just wanted to mention that the Go Human campaign that was mentioned in the FHWA presentation as winning the award, that is funded through ATP, so we're very excited for SCAG for that. Okay. So tab 16 is a hearing on the 2017 Active Transportation Program Augmentation Guidelines. The purpose of this hearing is to obtain final public comment on the 2017 Active Transportation Program Augmentation Guidelines before adoption. The proposed 2017 ATP Augmentation Guidelines are included as an attachment to tab 17, which you should have as a pink item. These guidelines are an addendum to the 2017 ATP guidelines adopted at the March 2016 meeting. The guidelines were developed to describe policies and procedures specific to the use of the fiscal year 17-18 and 18-19 funding from the road maintenance and rehabilitation account created by SB1. The Commission may amend the guidelines after conducting at least one public hearing. Staff conducted 2 workshops with the ATP Stakeholder Working Group to get feedback on the guidelines. One workshop was held on June 9th in conjunction with the other SB1 programs. And then another workshop was held on Friday, June 23rd. Stakeholders could participate in person or by teleconference. Participants included representatives from regional agencies, cities, state agencies, and advocacy groups. Staff also received comments through emails, phone calls, and letters. The workshops focused on 2 main topics. One was just our overall plan for distributing the road maintenance and rehabilitation account funds, and then also the specifics of the project evaluation and selection. The guidelines before you today represent a general consensus of the ATP stakeholders. And I just want to highlight a couple key points in the guidelines. One is that our overall plan for using those 17-18 and 18-19 our MRA funds for the ATP are by advancing projects that were programmed in the 2017 ATP that can advance into those earlier years, and by bringing in projects that were not successful in the last 2017 ATP but still score very high. Okay, and then the project eligibility will only be available to projects programmed in the adopted 2017 ATP that can be delivered earlier, and projects that applied for funding in the 2017 ATP but were not selected for funding. In the statewide and small urban and rural components, we recommend not using the 2017 ATP augmentation funds to supplant other already committed funds. However, in the MPO component, we will allow supplanting of funds at the MPO's discretion. This is because we're allowing this because typically what happens in the MPO component is that they get to the bottom of their funding amount and they have that one project that they can't quite fund. So we want to rectify that some through these augmentation funds. And then the project selection criteria and evaluation will be based on the project's 2017 ATP score and project deliverability. And there's 2 things that we want to add to the guidelines that are not on there now. And one is just to clarify this point that I was just mentioning about the MPOs being able to supplant funds. We just want to clarify in the guidelines that that is for projects that were programmed in the 27 ATP that there was not quite enough funds to fully fund them. That's the only instance for allowing the supplanting of the funds. Okay, and then the other thing is based on this conversation here, we would like to add a statement about having signage go up for projects that were funded with the SB1 funds. Before we open the public comment, I'd like to thank all the stakeholders for working together to help staff develop these guidelines very quickly and very efficiently. Everyone recognized the need to get some of these SB1 funds programmed on projects as soon as possible to help expedite the process. At this point, staff recommends opening the hearing for public comment.
We have no speakers listed. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to speak? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing.
Okay, so tab 17, this is an action item to adopt the 2017 Active Transportation Program Augmentation Guidelines. As I said, you have this item as a pink, and I just wanted to mention again that we would like to add those 2 revisions that I mentioned. And so with those noted, staff recommends your approval of the 2017 ATP Augmentation Guidelines.
Move approval with kudos for all your great work.
Motion by Madaffer, second by
Tavoloni.
who? Yvonne?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will support the motion. I continue to be intrigued by the fact that we need to be looking at $1 billion or more on these projects and making sure that women can take advantage of them. I really want to hear from Caltrans more on that original article I read some time ago about 80% of active transportation users, particularly bike lanes, are used by men, and make sure we don't have Title IX issues and have equity issues for women in some way. So I know that's not in the guidelines, so please consider that note for future use. As I just said, I'm prepared to support the motion, but I continue to not see gender issues, equity issues addressed on that front. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any further questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, item 20, Teresa.
Commissioners, item 20 is an information item. These are the draft 2018 STIP guidelines presented as a pink in your package. Attachment A are the 2018 STIP specific guidelines, and attachment B are the permanent STIP guidelines. Just a couple of highlights on the 2018 STIP specific guidelines. They include the schedule. This is the schedule staff is proposing for the development of the 2018 STIP. PTA capacity. As there's a negative capacity in PTA funds, rail and transit projects currently programmed in the STIP will need to be delivered with other STIP funds, possibly federal funds, or be unprogrammed. Another highlight, which is a big deal, it's the advanced project development element. As Stephen Keck mentioned, it is the first time we get to program these funds since 2002. So that's exciting. Based on the capacity identified by budgets, we have calculated a target for APD funds. Regions will be able to advance their shares to program projects for environmental and design, which is a very good tool to utilize to get the projects ready for construction in future STIP cycles or possibly in other programs with SB1 funds. And the last item I want to highlight on the specific guidelines are expectations and priorities for the 2018 STIP. They will be the expectations and priorities will be the ones specified in the resolution the Commission adopted in the 2016 STIP. For the permanent guidelines, we are proposing minimal changes. The most noteworthy is the emphasis on project outputs and additional provisions in the timely use of funds. As mentioned earlier, there's a workshop scheduled for the July 17th. Will be the opportunity for regions, stakeholders to provide input on the guidelines. and the final guidelines will be coming before the commission for adoption at the August commission meeting.
Commissioners, item 22 is a information item for the final 2017 10-year shop plan. Please note that there's a PINK replacement item. In May of 2017, the Commission approved the transmittal of 11 staff comments on the proposed plan. Caltrans has indicated they have addressed 8 of the 11 comments in the revised plan, documented in this book item the responses to the remaining 3 items, and have just finished up their process of updating and reviewing the plan to reflect the requirements and funding from Senate Bill 1. Mr. Michael Johnson, Caltrans Transportation Asset Management Engineer, is here and available to answer questions you may have on this information item.
Thank you, Chair, Commission. I'm happy to report that we have a plan labeled final. We do appreciate the Commission's comments. We have incorporated the Commission's comments where there was an opportunity to do so. And this book item simply is closing the loop on the 3 items that we were unable to reflect within this document. The 3 items, the Commission had asked the department to align the needs assessment and the investment plan included within the State Highway System Management Plan with a book item from March of 2015. There is an agenda item later on this afternoon that will actually make modifications to that listing of assets that were presented in that March 2015 book item, effectively rendering that comment overcome by events. Additionally, the shop itself has many additional objectives that are beyond that list that were included in that March 2015 book item. So for those reasons, it didn't really make a lot of sense to, or it wasn't even possible to realign the presentation of the needs in that order. However, all the parts are still there. They're just not presented in order of that list. The second comment that we were unable to address within the context of this document, the Commission asked the Department to compare and contrast the condition of pavements and bridges on the state highway system with that of the local system. We've heard this in a prior Commission meeting. The statutory requirement for this particular document limits it to the state highway system and only to the shop funding specifically on the state highway system. Furthermore, the department doesn't have the information necessary to do that comparison of the state and local system, so we're unable to address that within the context of this document. And the final comment that we were unable to deliver or to produce was a request to deliver a final plan either standalone as a 10-year plan document or as a separate chapter within this document. In lieu of that, we were actually able to complete the document with all of the Commission changes and to reflect the additional investment in SB1, and we provided copies for all the commissioners of this final document.
No, really, I think we tried as much as possible to address the Commission's comments, and we appreciate the Commission's focus and review and the questions you had. All 11 were meaningful questions, and I think we addressed them as best as we can. I noticed that you were puzzled by the one item about comparing state and local. Just the vastness of the local system, we just don't have the capacity to make an intelligent comparison between what the issues are. I think each local jurisdiction has a handle on their system, and will probably be best in a position to tell us what the status of their system is, rather than try to collate that. We've done our best to just pay attention to the needs on the state highway system as required by law.
If I can add one point with respect to the comparison of the state and local system, we have been collaborating with the local agency group that is doing the local needs assessment, and we are trying through their issuance of a new RFP on their side for their consultant to bring the state highway system and the local system closer together to provide that to the commission. That will come out in their next. That will come out in their next update on the local side. If you recall, I believe it was in the March Commission meeting, there was a presentation of both state and local systems. And at that time, there was a difference in performance measures being used. We were using the commission-adopted measures, and on the local side, they were using measures that provided them better trend analysis. And so we've had some discussions about presenting a unified picture for the commission so that we can see both the state and local system side by side using the same measures. They still intend to retain their prior measures for trend purposes, but I think we're starting to work together to give the commission what you're looking for.
Thank you. Item 23.
Commissioners, tab 23 was put in case we had any comments on the final 10-year plan. We just received the 10-year plan yesterday afternoon. I have no comments to recommend to the commission at this time.
Okay, item 24, Stephen.
Yes, Commissioners, item 24 is the adoption of the interim shop guidelines. At the May meeting, the staff presented the interim guidelines to the Commission and to the world. We received comments from Caltrans. We worked over the last 3.5 weeks with Caltrans to incorporate their comments. We also received yesterday or day before yesterday a letter from MTC with some of their comments. We've responded to MTC via email. You have in your packet the revised guidelines, interim guidelines with a strike through and underline to see what the changes are, and then you have a clean version. Staff would recommend that you adopt the interim guidelines. And the reason we're having these as interim guidelines because there are still going to be, we're going to be working through the processes of how to incorporate SB1 into all of this. We're just right now hitting the street running with what we've got.
I'm sorry. Now, the guidelines adopted today are interim, and they'll begin the process of increasing accountability of the SHOP program. I think it's critical to this commission that the accountability provisions of SB1 are effectively and comprehensively implemented. And as a result, I'd like to appoint Commissioners Arp, Ghimetti, and Madaffer to work with Commission staff on further refining the SHOP guidelines and to promote their highest level of accountability. So we'll have some direct involvement in the oversight. With that, moving to item 25.
Commissioners, item 25 is the adoption of the Transportation Asset Management Plan guidelines. Now, I can't be unintentionally funny like Stephen was, but the guidelines were posted to the Commission's website and made available as part of the May 2017 meeting. They were advertised to the world. I'm not sure we received comments from the world, but we did receive comments from the department staff. We met with the department staff and worked through those guidelines. The final guidelines are attached as attachment A to your book item, and they reflect the understanding of the department and the commission staff with respect to the Transportation Asset Management Plan. A new acronym for you to know is the TAMP. We'll be referring to it much later in the agenda as well. Staff recommends that you approve the TAMP guidelines and authorize staff to make technical, non-substantive edits to the guidelines.
I'm sorry. I keep asking me to turn it on. Jeannie Ward Waller will be speaking on item 25. Okay. I keep
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for taking my comment. Jeannie Wardwaller with the California Bicycle Coalition. I think maybe my comment is more appropriate on the interim guidelines, which was the last item, but you guys are moving really fast, so I didn't get in quick enough. But I just, wanted to say that we appreciate that those guidelines are interim and that there's going to be more work on the SHOP program. I think one thing that we've been working really closely with Mike Johnson on and with Caltrans is on the Complete Streets piece and looking for how we can really maximize the benefits of those SHOP dollars, particularly where state highways are carrying local traffic and where there's people bicycling and walking on those state highways. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement. We want to also make sure that there's requirements on tracking those benefits so we can really, see, as you all have already said with the SB1 funds, what kind of benefits we are getting from those dollars and demonstrating that to taxpayers that, we're fixing potholes and that's a huge priority, but we're also, making those streets safer and easier places to get around for the people that live in those communities. So we look forward to working with you more on this. I know, there's urgency to get these projects out the door really quickly and we support that, but we also think there's a huge opportunity here with these dollars to deliver on more benefits. And I just want to also highlight on that note that the California Bicycle Coalition commissioned a poll, a statewide poll last month on complete streets and public opinion around, really getting more bang for the buck out of our transportation dollars. And there really is huge support for those kinds of improvements. So I think while we want to be showing the voters and the taxpayers that we're fixing our roads and maintaining our infrastructure, I think we can also, really get a lot of support for SB1 and for these funds by showing them that we're doing a lot of other great things as well in a cost-effective way. So we hope to, play a role in helping get that message out there and supporting the work that the Commission and Caltrans and all of the local agencies are doing on this. And I shared the polling data with Susan and Mitch, so hopefully they'll forward it all to you, and we look forward to your questions and feedback on that data. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
And Jeannie, just to let you know, we did listen to you at the last workshop that we held, and we actually included language on complete streets in the interim SHOP guideline.
Thank you, Sue.
And we told the world, huh, Stephen? Okay, there's a motion on the floor. Any further questions? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 26, Curtis.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I have just a short presentation for you today on the Road Charge Pilot Program. I'd like to start by referring just briefly to Stephen's fund estimate presentation on item 19 and the projections for gas consumption, which saw declined almost 20% over the next 10 years as far as projections go. We definitely need a long-term solution for an alternative for revenue collection, and road charge is a question of how we get the money, not how much money we get. So, how do we collect revenues in a sustainable and fair way? So on the pilot schedule, as you all know, the participant portion of the pilot program ended on March 31st. The operations have closed out, and the independent evaluator, CH2M, has provided their report to Caltrans. We are currently in phase 4 of the schedule that's shown, looking at reporting findings and determining the next steps for the road charge program. Caltrans, under the State Transportation Agency, is responsible for evaluating the program and reporting those findings. My understanding is that there's a draft of the report that's currently being revised and worked through, and there's no current scheduled release of that findings report. The next steps, the Commission has the responsibility for looking at the pilot program and the findings report, consulting with our Technical Advisory Committee chaired by Commissioner Madaffer, and issuing recommendations to the legislature for whether and how a road charge program should move forward in California. The TAC met following the last commission meeting in May and began really working on refining their advice on those recommendations. At this meeting, we broke out into 3 different work groups to discuss administration of a program, social equity issues, and data privacy. The TAC outlined some really good beginning guidelines for establishing the road charge program, and there seems to be a consensus that as a long-term solution, road charge could replace the gas tax as a primary mechanism for funding transportation infrastructure in the future. In September, the TAC will meet again to continue to refine their advice to you, and At this time, it's anticipated that we'll be looking at making short-term recommendations in the 2017 annual report, and the Commission's full road charge report will contain a comprehensive list of recommendations and kind of a roadmap looking forward. The final policy perspectives, we anticipate the State Transportation Agency will report findings which impact many policy areas, including those shown: data security, privacy, the question of impacts on rural versus urban drivers, fleet parity, some questions about rate setting, making sure that we look at income equity and the administrative costs of such a change. We're looking forward to seeing those evaluations and findings. It's interesting to look at some of the other efforts among agencies. California is just one of the many states and the federal government which are examining road charge. Caltrans will continue to work on piloting road charge elements. The federal government's currently got an outstanding amount of about $80 million in grant funds for exploring gas tax alternatives. Caltrans received one of the first grants to continue to, or to newly look at a pay at the pump, pay at the charging infrastructure concept, and they've submitted this month also a grant application for the second round. Washington State is entering procurement for their 12-month pilot that's going to start next January. Two of the states in the I-95 coalition on the East Coast are looking at doing road charge programs and studies, particularly looking at interstate trucking, which is a piece that's really important that we weren't able to do in our pilot. And Caltrans is also a member of the RUC West coalition of 14 states studying interoperability, regional issues, and they'll shortly be releasing a study on the impacts for rural drivers. The rural drivers impact shows that in addition with the Mineta study and others, there's virtually no difference, or perhaps some of the rural communities see a benefit from a change to a road charge program over the gas tax. I'll be reaching out to you individually to have more discussions as these recommendations coalesce, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have on the program at this time.
Information calendar, Stephen.
Yes, Commissioners, the next 12 agenda items, 27 through 38, are information items that do not raise any issues. There's one thing that some commissioners raised with me is that they would like to see during the fourth quarter report that the Caltrans rail operations be reported on at the subsequent commission meeting. That takes us through the information calendar. Now onto the consent calendar. Consent calendar is next 35 items, 39 through 37. Following changes need to be mentioned. Item 63 is pulled from the agenda. Item 53, Amador County request to be put back into District 10 from District 3. Under item 59, resolutions of necessity, resolution C 21544 is withdrawn from the agenda. Under item number 60, director's deeds, item 1 and item 4 are also withdrawn from the agenda. With these corrections, staff recommends that you approve the consent calendar.
Motion by Tavaloni, second by Medaffer. Question, Mr. Gilmetti.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got some concerns about item 42, 43, and 48. You know, we've been trying to put money out as fast as possible, and these three items are asking for delays. Item 42 stretches it out to fiscal year 19 and 20. Item 43 again stretches it out to 19 and 20, and item 48 stretches it out to 18, 19. Does the staff any comments on that?
Well, that would be a STIP issue, so we'll have Teresa address that.
Item 42, this is the Bay Area, BART is requesting the STIP amendment. We have asked someone from BART to be here and respond to concerns.
Commissioners, I would suggest that we pull these items off consent and hear them separately, so we can take an action on the items where you don't have a question.
That's fine with me.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. So let's go to, tell you what, let's take a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 5 minutes to 3.